Welcome, everybody. It's Rob Brown here with another in this series of professional roundtables we're doing in a virtual world with leaders and influencers in the global accounting space. We've got four amazing guests today. They're going to introduce themselves in just a moment, but we admit that we are in crazy times. And in professional services, the accountants, the lawyers, and other people that are serving businesses all over the world, we are under immense pressure. We're faced with uncertainty, anxiety. It's a new world. And to make sense of this all and speak into some of these situations, we have these four esteemed guests. So Anthony, can I ask you to introduce yourself first, and then we'll go around from there so that people know who you are and who you represent.
Okay, a pleasure. My name is Antonio Gomez. I'm the international president of Auren International. Auren is technically is a network. And also I am the CEO of Antia Alliance of Independent Firms. That is an association. Besides that, I'm the president of our regional professional accounting organization. And I am a member of the small medium practice advisory group of IFAC. And besides Auren is a multidisciplinary firm present in 11 countries, covering services in audit and assurance, tax and legal, consultancy and corporate finance. And we are present in 59 countries, basically, offices, basically in Europe and in Latin America.
Thank you, Anthony. You obviously have more hours in your day than everyone else to be able to do all of those things.
Well, some of the elements are absolutely complementary and give a wide vision of what happens and what could be the strategy to follow in these complex times.
Yeah, that's great. It's lovely to have you with us. Chris Warden, welcome. Please give us a little introduction of who you are and what you do.
Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you very much. I'm here representing the Global Alliance Advisory Service. This is a service to associations, global networks, and fellow directors are John Lisby and James Mendelson. And we are really providing an outsourced service and external perspective to associations and networks that want to maybe have some strategic input or to have some particular recruitment project or this type of thing. And it's an interesting change for me because prior to that, I was the European director at Moore Stephens, More Global, for a very long time. And yeah, it's really interesting to see what it's like when you see inside different organizations and you see often many of the same challenges, opportunities, and so on, but quite different from when you're very focused on one particular organization and trying to do the best to develop that one. So I'm very interested in this new challenge. I have been doing this now for about 5 months, and it's an interesting time to be doing it because obviously having just come on board, we then had the pandemic, and so really we were all, as with all of you, working in a very different situation to normally.
Yeah. Well, you're in great company with James Mendelson and John Lisby. James has been on these panels a couple of times before, and James and John both know the accounting networks world extremely well with their heritage. So great to have you with us, Chris. Chris Robinson, welcome, and please give us a little introduction.
Thank you very much. I'm the EMEA Regional Market Director for Allineal Global. We are a worldwide association of accounting and consulting firms. We've got about 240 members worldwide, presence in about 85 countries, and we're ranked as the second largest association by the IAB. Personally, I should just say I'm not an accountant. I've never run an accounting firm. My background is really sales, marketing, project management. So I come at it with that sort of perspective. So perhaps anything I say should come with a health warning. But anyway, I'm very pleased to be here.
Thank you, Chris, and we appreciate the caveat. I'm not an accountant either. So, and I don't know if William Johnson is an accountant, but in some ways William is the odd one out, but we've been recently acquainted, and he does speak into the world of accounting networks and alliances. So William, please, a little introduction.
Good afternoon. Nice to be here. In the current situation, it's nice to be anywhere. I'm a psychologist by trade, and I'm the current MD of the OpenSide Group, and we deliver cognitive and behavioral training to professional services worldwide. Our primary market has always been training management consulting firms, but in the last 10 years, we've, as more accounting firms have moved into the advisory area, we're doing more and more training for them worldwide in similar sorts of skills that we train strategy firms, integration firms, and commoditized consulting firms in.
Terrific. Well, it's great to have you with us, William. And I didn't mention Chris Robinson, but Terry Snyder's been on a couple of panels, and you have some big shoes to fill as well, because Terry is quite a character.
Well, indeed, we do have our new CEO, Mark Kozil, arriving on the 1st of August. Yeah. So we're looking forward to that with great anticipation.
Indeed, and giving Terry some time off for good behaviour. And Mark's going to come on one of these panels in August. So, gentlemen, great to have you with us. Let's unpack a few things, and let's start with lessons learned. And Chris Rawdon, I'm going to come to you first on this one, because back in Moore Stevens' days, you'll have gone through recessions before. We went through a tough time in 2008-9. We've had global recessions and economic downturns before, but we've had nothing like this, have we? So what has this taught us about the accounting profession, do you feel?
Well, I suppose it might seem an obvious point, but I suppose one of the lessons that we've all learned is that far more meetings online can work than we ever thought was possible before. And it was odd in a way that in the past we would probably not have exploited that approach to things so much. Now we have seen how we can deliver a lot of value. We can have smaller group, even larger group webinars, ditch the travel, reduce the expense, and compared to physical meetings, we save a lot of time. So I suppose really that is quite a major shift, and it's causing everybody, I think, to see, well, what's my business model going to be in the future? Because how can I deliver, say, 3/4 of the same value if this situation would persist, and let's say people would just not choose to travel, even if they could travel. I suppose the question is then, probably we can make a lot more out of this, and we can connect people in different ways. We have far less cost, and in a way we can deliver a lot. We can reduce our costs, but still provide the value. I suppose time will tell whether you can really get up to 3/4 of the membership value this way, or whether the fact that you can't meet physically is really having a consequence. And of course, in certain types of discussions where you really need to have that person's attention in the same room, and you really want to spend time perhaps for a serious, deep discussion, yes, you can't replicate that. But I think we've seen how much you can replicate. So that would be my initial thoughts on what we've seen so far. And how it's causing us to have to think in new and different ways, because we don't know when all this will get to a point where some familiarity will return. And I'm always wary when I hear that word. You hear the new normal, or you hear when people say, oh, when things get back to normal. I just think they won't get back to normal, because if we would have the choice of going back to normal, let's say next week, would we necessarily jump at it?
Yeah.
That, I think, is for me the question. I'm not sure we would. I mean, having done a little bit of traveling recently and been to an airport, been on a couple of flights because I had to go on a couple of things, it was okay. It was well managed by the airlines, but I'm not sure I would choose to do it if I didn't really need to do it. So I think we'll reassess the value and the need differently now.
Yeah, quite so. And Chris Robinson, accountants as a race, they're not known for being agile and interchange. Right. But as Chris was hinting there, there's a new way to look at things now.
Absolutely. I mean, I think this is a sort of wake-up call moment for not just for the accounting profession, but for businesses generally. I think many businesses have, up until now, seen their accountant as a necessary evil, a compliance engine that they need from time to time. Now I think there's much more recognition directly as a result of the pandemic, that accountants have a critical role to play as the business's trusted advisor. After all, you know, the accountant has got a really good end-to-end understanding, or he should do, of your business. He probably knows your family circumstances, the ownership structures within the business, and so on. So I think, first of all, businesses have realized this, and I think a number of accountants who probably should have known this for many years now also recognize that they are an absolutely critical part of SME business ecosystems. So I think we can now very much see that accounting firms are front and center for businesses' survival programs going forwards. I think the other thing that just strikes me, which surprised me to some extent, is the resilience of the vast majority of firms that we've seen, who've overcome their immediate cash and survival concerns. Obviously, you know, partner drawings are being cut, people are being furloughed. We're likely to see loss of headcount going forwards as well. But I think it's been pretty remarkable that businesses have survived, that firms have survived, and that they're actually thriving, and that they're able to carry on delivering services and new services as well.
Yeah, and I'm going to ask you in a minute what smart choices accounting firms have made to get through this, but we'll come to that. Anthony, you talk to accounting firms every day. You sense that they are learning as they go along. There's a lot of uncertainty around. What do you feel the accounting profession is learning throughout this?
In my view, the accountancy profession has learned a lot. I think there are three main problems that are present for accountancy firms since quite a long time ago. One is technology. Technology is changing very dramatically and is necessary to follow the path of threat is
I think, Anthony, we've just lost you a little bit there. Is everyone else struggling to hear Anthony? Okay. Anthony, you've just frozen for a moment, so I'm going to go to William and perhaps come back to you if the internet improves. So hang on in there and we will jump back. William, do you want to just come in here on what you feel from your perspective the accounting profession has learned from what's going on?
Yeah, building on what Chris Robinson said, the realization of the opportunity to fill the role of the trusted advisor. What we've noticed, therefore, is that a number of them have realized that they don't have the skills to do that. And they've realized that being a technical expert is not enough.
Sorry.
Hold on. We'll come back to you in a minute, Anthony. We've just gone to William. We'll come back. Carry on, William, please.
I think they've realized that being a technical expert is not enough. And what the remote working, virtual Zoom type of relationship has highlighted is even more the fact that being a technical expert is not enough. Because if you're going to operate virtually and you're going to deliver technical stuff, it's best delivered, if it's virtually, it's best delivered by text or Word or some kind of document. So the key component of the virtual operation behaviorally is about exploration of context, conversational skills, relationship building. And I think the virtual world's really highlighted that. And where before it may have been obvious that to be a trusted advisor, you need to be able to explore context as well as have content to deliver. I think the virtual world has made that blindingly obvious now, that it's not going to be enough to be a trusted, if you want to be a trusted advisor, being technically competent is just a ticket to the game.
Yeah, that's a good point. And you and I have spoken offline, William, haven't we, about accountants want to be the trusted advisor, but there is pressure on there from management consultants, from tech firms, from IT companies, from media, from telecoms, and everyone wants to own that space, don't they?
Absolutely, they do. And the interesting thing as well is how things evolve very quickly. So this idea of resilience and responding and how behaviors change. You know, when in the first couple of months on Zoom, people were finding their way around, and it was a bit of a joke that, you know, people were wandering across half naked in the back, or they had dogs on their laps and things. But pretty soon that became rather tedious. And I noticed yesterday there was an article in the Wall Street Journal, the 7 Zoom etiquette protocols now, because people are getting really fed up with the interruptions, and they've got to the point after 3 months where Zoom is now not the sort of, you can't get away with being an amateur on Zoom or Teams, or you have to be a master of the technology, you have to be presentable, you have to have a reasonable background, and it's not that sort of tolerance of naivety or amateurism has disappeared pretty quickly.
Yeah.
And so there's a, you know, that's the other thing that we've noticed is this this sort of drive to becoming, even virtually, to become as professional as you can as a differentiator.
Yeah, I understand that, although none of us are wearing ties right now. So there is some relaxing of protocols there. Anthony, we did lose you earlier. You were talking about 3 things that the accounting professionals learned. You mentioned technology, then we lost you for a moment. So do you want to carry on from there real quick?
Yes, of course. I'm sorry for that. Now, the second point is attraction and retention of talent. That this is also a matter around the world, because there are less people willing to follow this kind of career. And the third is to maintain relevancy for clients. And I say, in very few months, we have moved on giant steps forward. The transformation has been enormous and surprising. There is an statistics in Spain before the pandemic crisis. Only 4.5% of the workers work at least 1 or 2 days a week remotely. After the pandemic, the ratio is more than 30. And in our profession is almost 100%. This gives also opportunities to retain talent, because again, at least according with a survey that we did in our professional accounting organization, one of the reasons that most of the women left the career, and a proof is that now we are 5 men and no women, is that the difficulty for conciliation. Remote working, virtual work allows that. And this could make that we were able to retain this part of the talent people. In most of the firms, at the beginning, 50% of the employees are female. But then most of them left the profession because this kind of difficulty. So I think this is one point that in this sense, we have learned a lot of lessons. It's possible to organize our work, and certainly proximity to the client. I fully agree that it's necessary to be close to the client, but we have understood that it's not necessary to meet physically all the times to maintain this kind of close contact to the clients.
Yeah. There's so many good points there. I did a webinar yesterday for a global accounting network on exemplary leadership in tough times, and made the observation that if you look at the leaders in accounting firms at the moment, the majority of them are over 50 years old. The majority of them are men, and the majority of them are white. And without getting into the whole diversity thing, COVID is giving us a chance to shift and make changes now and accelerate changes. So Yeah, feel free to come back on any of those points that I brought. But Chris, I'm going to come to you next on the next question, Chris Robinson, about what, and I know your lineal firms are absolutely exemplary and they do everything right. What smart things have you seen them do in response to this pandemic?
Well, I think really picking up on what you've just said, we've seen some really impressive adaptability and versatility around leadership, around team building, and around communications. I think, you know, professional services firms generally are not renowned for being fleet of foot, but I think we've seen some firms, a lot of firms, moving with really impressive speed to adopt the new technologies, to allow people within their firms to play to their particular strengths. You know, they've had to get their heads around huge amounts of new information around government support schemes, for example. They've managed to understand all of that, get that information out to their clients, and you know, all within the context of this transition to the Zoom culture. So we've seen a lot of really great collaborative working, you know, practice management, service line specialists, IT people, all embracing what they need to do next. I think out of that, we've seen firms actually developing and delivering crisis management, if you like, as a new service line.
Yeah.
So it's not just around the government aid, but it goes way downstream of that. So looking at companies' cash flow, their business model, their supply chain, their insurance arrangements, employee communications.
And that's what a trusted advisor should be doing, Chris, isn't it?
That's exactly. Yeah. But I think this has really forced the pace.
Yeah.
I mean, let me just say one thing anecdotally. One of the managing partners of one of our largest member firms said that they have accomplished 3 years development in 3 months.
Yeah.
You know, all of these things that they had been planning to do, but had just been progressively kicked down the road, they've actually managed to do it. And that's been a huge lesson.
Yeah. And William, you specialize in the cognitive side, the behavioral side. What smart things have you seen accounting firms getting right throughout this?
Well, I think, you know, Chris, to build on what Chris said again, we've seen one of the questions you ask is, what are you doing now that you wouldn't have thought of doing before the crisis? And I think this idea of accelerating the development has been really significant. And I think we see that across the whole spectrum of professional services. The other innovative thing, I think, that we've seen as a development firm, most of our clients, all of our clients are professional service firms, but of course we deal with either the HR partner or in this sort of internal personnel area, development area. We've seen a really increased response in the firm's attention to individual welfare. So to do with, as Anthony was saying, about working from home, so a number of firms, when they decided they would go to home working, they realized that a lot of the junior population weren't necessarily terribly well equipped domestically because they're sharing apartments or flats. They weren't terribly equipped. So they they allowed them to buy home working desks and stations, and they kitted them out to make it easier technically for them to work from home. And then they set up innovative things like coffee rooms and online coffee rooms, and much more proactive in keeping the staff engaged. Yeah. And I was talking to an Italian firm this morning, and they said that the feedback they're getting is that their consultants are now feeling much more engaged than they did before.
Yeah.
Which is extraordinary, really.
Yeah. And Chris Rodden, we're hearing more about engagement, but you help accounting networks, associations deal with the strategy side of things. Chris Robinson's point is well made, isn't it? That they've made quicker decisions and they've implemented strategy more quickly. Maybe lines of communication, the hierarchies have been broken down and they've just got to it faster, haven't they? What have you seen them doing well?
Yeah, I would agree with what Chris and also with what William have just said. I mean, I think in general terms, ideas that perhaps previously were kind of on the too difficult pile have been brought off very quickly because there isn't a roadmap. So it's not like, oh, you know, if we wait until October, we'll have the solution. It's like we have to create a solution. So I think it's interesting to see how there's a difference, perhaps you could say, between some groups that we've spoken to where the conservative culture, if you like, is still very much in evidence. There's probably fear, there's concern about taking a bold step. And then it's kind of like, what will it take to get, you know, to help those people to see that actually it's necessary to take an unprecedented step. There are others who are coming and more the impression is, no, we're ready for this now because we have to do something. If we look ahead a year and if we wouldn't think about our options, we might find we don't have, you know, we're not collecting the fees from 3/4 of our members. You know, we might get, you know, we'll have a reduction in our income. We'll have problems of an economic or financial kind. So people are taking that very seriously, of course, and working hard to change it. I think, though, with what William was saying, the whole thing about managing people's well-being is critical because so many people have never had to work and do teleworking or working from home on this extent. And, you know, the idea that that's somehow a kind of support that the leadership needs to show is probably really, really so welcome because you get to know your leaders in different ways. You get to see that actually you're dealing with real people. I mean, it is a people business. It's very important to feel that. And I think some of the people who struggled said things like, well, I'm a people person. I find it very hard to work online. Then the question is, we don't want you to be any less of a people person, but is there a way we can help you to be that, bring that skill, but to connect and to have help that way? And, you know, to kit out your office and all of that is really important. But to have these virtual coffee breaks and virtual connections is so important because otherwise you really are a bit alone a lot of the time.
Who would have thought we'd have been talking about accountants as people? That's just unheard of, isn't it? And Anthony, we're asking accountants to be more like the businesses they serve and maybe more entrepreneurial in how they're dealing with this, in that adapting and that agility. What are you seeing them doing well?
Yes, absolutely. And I think one of the points of the professional firms is that they will be more multidisciplinary. Basically, because at the end, what the client needs is something that was, as was mentioned before, the trustee advisor. And this has to do not only and mainly with compliance work, but also with strategy, with the vision for future, with understanding at the end the vision. And also it would be necessary to be sector specialist because otherwise it would be very difficult to make the valuable and relevant advice to the clients. But I think that one thing that in this crisis has been very important is that normally all people stay on the comfort zone. And in this case, the point is that our premises have been changed immediately, suddenly, and we have needed to adapt a new environment. And this makes that, as said before, we have progressed enormously in very short time. Yeah. So now everybody is understanding that the world would be different than 4 or 5 months ago. So people understand that it would be necessary to adapt to this new world, that we don't know exactly the details, but we have the need to embrace the change to be relevant in future.
Yeah, very good. And William, you just wanted to add something real quick. You just put it in the chat right there about the cycle that professional firms seem to be going through right now.
Yeah, they seem to have gone through very quickly the classic Kubler-Ross cycle of, it's to do with grief, but denial, anger, bargaining, depression, and acceptance.
Yeah.
And, you know, denial and anger got through pretty quickly. There was a bit of bargaining about, you know, does it have to be like this? And everyone was pretty depressed, but acceptance came pretty quickly. And what was interesting was the response to it, as Chris said.
Yeah. Well, we've talked about lessons learned. We've talked about some of the good things that firms are doing, but Chris Rod, and accountants don't always get everything right. These networks you're dealing with and the firms that they serve, where do they need to improve, in your opinion, to regain the ground and maybe get back to where they were before?
I think the question reminds me a bit of when some years ago we had the EU audit reform back in 2011.
We all know about that, obviously. It's
we had very much this idea of reducing concentration in the audit from the Big Four and so on.
right.
And I sometimes think, as mid-tier networks, what we have to remember is we're basically trying to take the space, and if anybody's the enemy, it's the Big Four and its strong local independent firms. So rather than all be competing against each other, I think, as has been said already, there's much more room now to reach out for collaboration and see how different groups can support one another, whether that's in some formal alliance or whether that's in some way offering some referral opportunity or something like this. But I think to build stronger ties, both for supporting clients and for supporting the groups, is going to be more and more important. And I think, we can also see how some alliances, some networks and associations they're starting to form, or they have already formed, sort of multi-tier membership parts. So, you might have an alliance that's separate from the main membership, and maybe that's catering for smaller firms that want to be part of an association or a network. They may not have all the same benefits, but they will get the benefit of having a professional peer group that they can exchange knowledge and expertise with. They'll have access to resources, that kind of thing. I think we're going to see more and more of that, because it gets away from this idea that separately we can all somehow go about our business and still maintain success. I think success is going to come more from collaborative venture rather than 20, 25, 30 mid-tier size associations and networks all kind of competing against each other.
Yeah, that does make good sense. And Anthony, I'm going to ask you the question now about improvement, but you can take this both ways. You can speak on behalf of what do the networks and associations need to improve on to serve their member firms more, or maybe the accounting firms themselves. Where do they need to improve? So where do you want to go with that?
One of the point is that we need to make ordinary what has been extraordinary, and so integrate some of the practices, and then it appears some other elements that would need to be improved. For instance, matters around cybersecurity. This would be more important. Confidentiality with clients, etc. I think one element that besides the extraordinary circumstances and the traveling restrictions, etc., would be that the globalization will continue. And one proof of the globalization is this kind of pandemic that has been extended around the world and affecting all the world. So I think it would be certainly important collaboration at different levels. And this is why also collaboration with other professionals would be very important. Collaboration between accountants and lawyers is absolutely essential, because both are attending very closely similar needs from clients. And so this kind of opening to other kind of professionals, human resources specialists, marketing specialists, lawyers, etc., I think would be some element that would need to improve in future.
And William, this is not a time for firms and indeed networks to isolate themselves. Collaboration's been mentioned a lot, hasn't it? And if we're talking about what firms can improve on, is collaboration, communication part of that mix, or is it something else for you?
Yeah, one of the things that I've noticed, the opportunity that again has exposed itself, is the opportunity to get closer and build upon the relationships you have with your clients that possibly the big firms don't have. So you start, the smaller firms and the firms that are part of a network have perhaps been guilty of taking for granted the level of intimacy they have. And I'm not sure And so one of the things that behaviorally has really irritated clients is that they've been inundated with offers of their new best friend from firms that they haven't heard from in the last 10 years. And suddenly they're getting notes to say, we're here to help you. Well, that reflects the level of the connection. But what's been noticeable in some conversations I've had with members of the Allineal group, for example, is that they've taken this opportunity to stay close to their clients and build those relationships even further. So I think that's highlighted for the future for the small firms and the networked firms, is the importance of staying close to your clients. And the closer you get, the stronger the relationship, and the less likely, it's a real competitive differentiator with bigger firms.
Yeah.
It's this intimacy and understanding.
But Chris Robinson, it's nice to give you the last word on this with Allineal, just having a shout out. But the thing is about the accounting profession, it is an elegant business model. There's recurring fees. It's required by law, a lot of it, the compliance and everything else. So accountants can get complacent on being intimate with their clients. And Anthony and Chris have both mentioned this as well. Where do you feel accountants need to improve to get back to where they were?
Well, I would absolutely like to pick up on a couple of things that Anthony said, which I firmly believe that accountants have got to diversify their service offering, but they need to go into non-traditional service lines like HR, like managed IT systems, support, this sort of thing that gives them more opportunities to be sticky with the clients, if you like, provide them with this holistic service.
And if I can just add to that, Chris, Trusted Advisor isn't just providing extra services, but it's signposting to those services and bringing them into the conversation, isn't it? Saying, here's where you should talk. Yeah,
absolutely. I mean, the other component of that is that everybody in the firm has to become a salesman. I think that's really important. It doesn't just apply to accountants. It applies to many, many businesses, if not all businesses. Everybody in the firm has got an opportunity to represent the firm in every interaction that they have with the client, and getting people out of their comfort zones into really embracing a client-facing role, explaining how they can deliver benefit to their clients, I think is really key. So training is going to be a really essential component of what happens in the future. Much more focus on that.
Yeah. I've seen some research from Hinge Marketing out of the US that says that the firms that will recover fastest from this are the ones that will invest in their technology and infrastructure, and the ones, and particularly digital, and the ones that will invest in their people, not just on their technical skills to cope with the complexity of what's going on right now to serve clients, but their soft skills. You talked about selling there. We've talked about accountants being more entrepreneurial in their thinking so they can relate more to their business clients. So yeah, any further thoughts on that from any of you gentlemen before we move on? Okay,
sorry. No, one significant point is that it should be understood that things have changed. For instance, it's true that we need to be closer to the clients, but closer to the clients would be in different ways. Most entrepreneurs are people from new generation, millennials, and Z generation. That the kind of criteria to be loyal to one advisor is completely different. We can see this on normal shopping. People have a lot of alternatives, and they are very easy changing from one to the other. Certainly in our services, this element of trust is very important, but the way of maintaining trust would be different, not necessarily in the same way that some years before. In this sense, certainly training, retaining key people, young people in our firms, etc., is extremely important.
Yeah,
it's true that in my view, there would be several professional accountants that probably will disappear. Those that were from the, let's say, with the mind in the 20th century and not understanding that we are in the 21st century.
Yeah.
If someone is not accountant 4.0, probably will disappear. But those people had disappeared even within the pandemic crisis.
Yeah, thank you. Very good points. Chris Rodden, did you want to add something real quick there?
Yeah, I mean, it reminded me what Anthony was saying, and also Chris, about, you know, this old moments of truth model, that there used to be this idea that, you know, the moment somebody comes into the office, that's when you can influence them. And it goes from everything from how the office looks to how they're spoken to how the coffee tastes, and then they form an impression. And all of these things are constantly happening. And as Anthony said, we have to find new ways of staying close to the clients, not the same way that we did in the past.
Yeah. Well, gentlemen, we're coming towards the end of this now, and it's time to get out that crystal ball. Obviously, it's so difficult to make predictions and look ahead because nobody knows what's going on right now. But I am asking you what you think might happen for the rest of 2020 and even 2021. And because while you think about that, we know for sure that there is some kind of recession coming up. We know that tax bills that have been deferred will become payable. We know that loans that have been taken out will become payable. We know that the governments have borrowed huge amounts of money to keep the workforce liquid. So there are tough times coming up this year and next. So Chris Robinson, I'm going to start with you on this one. What advice or encouragement can you offer us for the remainder of the year and next year for the accounting profession?
Well, I would say clearly right now cash remains king, but remember that recessions don't last forever, and that entrepreneurs always look for opportunities in recessions.
Yeah.
I mean, if you cast your mind back to the late Aristotle Onassis buying ships in the middle of the Great Depression in 1932, when they were really cheap. I mean, fantastic vision and opportunity. So right now there are threats, but there are going to be opportunities. So I think particularly those opportunities for accounting firms will be around developing new services and providing advice around restructuring, business recovery, business planning, M&A, really as clients start to move away from the crisis towards the future. How can they develop their own new business models? I would say don't fall into the trap of laying off too many people. You really need to focus on retaining talents, because you are going to need those people 2 to 3 years down the track. I know it's going to be very tempting to cut headcount, but you have to be really careful that you don't go too far in that direction, I think. And then finally, I would say, and again, I think this has been said before, but there will clearly be acquisition opportunities for many firms. I think inevitably there will be some fallout. Smaller and even larger firms will say, do you know what, the cost of investment to bring on the new technology, to retrain, restaff, we're out. So I think opportunities to grow through acquisition will abound as well.
Yeah.
So I think, you know, be cautious, but focus on where you ought to be in 2 to 3 years' time.
That's very good. And I had just yesterday the difference between positivity and optimism. Positivity is saying everything's okay. Everything's going to be okay. But optimism is, look, things are tough right now, but we will get through this. And we've talked on this panel about the resiliency of the human animal, that we do survive and we will get through. And but positivity is just denying that things are bad. But optimism is saying we know where things are, but there is a light at the end of the tunnel, and things will get better. Chris Rodden, let me come to you on this. Chris Robinson talked there about the importance of recruitment and retention of talent. You advise professional networks on strategy and recruitment. What advice and encouragement would you give to the professional fraternity here in the light of what's going on?
I would say, building on what Chris said, I entirely pick up those points. I agree with that. I think there will be acquisition opportunities. And I think people will look at them in a different way to how they did in the past.
How do you mean?
Well, in the sense that, you know, I think in the past, associations, global networks and associations tended to think, well, making a global merger is really too much of a demand. It's too difficult to achieve. And we've seen countless examples over the years where different attempts to merge groups didn't work. Or partly, you know, maybe part of it would have worked, but not the whole thing. I think now it's much more concentrating on, you know, what are the win-wins? I mean, if we can come together with an established group in some way, we can have an economically well-balanced model. They can reduce central overheads. They have a chance to grow their membership. We grow together. Then, you know, you can see that kind of thing being more likely, rather than say some of the smaller associations that might otherwise risk, you know, going to the wall, because if they have got particularly smaller member firms with smaller clients whose businesses are less resilient, and perhaps that are less international, less resilient anyway, those are the ones that are vulnerable. And I would have thought that at that end of the market, there could well be some moves, because this would ensure not just their survival, but their growth within an already existing quite strong structure.
Yeah. And Anthony Gomez, we will lose some firms. Chris Roden was talking there about the mergers and acquisitions, the movements on the network association level, but even at the firm level as well, there will be some buying and selling, and some firms won't survive, will they?
Yes, certainly. It would be probably quite a lot of movements, because some of the firms will not resist or adapt to the change. In my view, some of them, just because they would have problems even without this kind of present crisis. In Spain, at least, the average age of the professional firms partners is very, very high. Is 59 years old. So that means that probably several of them are just thinking in retiring. It's an opportunity for firms with young partners that has afford the renewal, the new generation transition to expand and to merge. In my view, it would be much more difficult to see merge on alliance and international networks, because they would be precious in most of the countries. So probably it would be more difficulties on that. But certainly on moving from one network or association to the other, this would be possible.
Yeah.
Anyway, I think there is a lot of room for professional firms, certainly changing, adapting to this new scenario. Essentially, in these uncertain times, unfortunately, the society demands more transparency, is necessary more trust, not only on financial information, but also on non-financial information. This is extraordinary room for professional accountings. You know that in Europe, there is some kind of directive around non-financial information. And this would be expanding, because it's the demand of the society to know more about what are companies and other kind of organization doing. So in my view, it would be a different kind of accountant, more leading a practice, and in this sense, as Chris mentioned, more an entrepreneur than just a sole practitioner, focus on technical matters, but even being able to manage and to coordinate lawyers, human resources specialists, marketing specialists, etc., and having a more comprehensive view of the problems of clients, and then in this way being able to be close to them.
Yeah, very good. William, we'll come to you now, but can I just ask all of you panelists to have some closing remarks, particularly addressed to the leaders? What would you say to the leaders of accounting firms or the leaders of accounting networks? So if you could just prepare a final few thoughts about that before we ask William here. After we ask William, where do you see the opportunities coming up in the future for the accounting profession, William?
Well, I have a slightly different view. I think
you go for it. Be controversial.
Chris is warning about don't slim down so much. you know, in engineering and in manufacturing, you certainly have seen, there have been examples of organizational anorexia. You know, they slim down so much they can't put any weight back on when times change. We rarely see that in professional services. The reason being because of the associate model, that they, in difficult times, firms across the professional services spectrum tend to default to an associate model. So they keep a core staff and they can increase or decrease the bench as required. What's interesting in professional services, where disruption's coming from, driven as much by the gig economy and the generation Anthony was talking about, who don't want to be career big, you know, big organization people. There is that the disruptive model is networks of freelance or associated professionals. And I think we're going to see that accelerate. And I wouldn't necessarily predict the end of the big four, but I do think that the business models are going to have to change because the leverage isn't there. The generation that Anthony's talking about, the millennials and the generation after that, are not prepared to sweat 15 years before they get any equity or any return. And the disruptive models like even McCullum and some of the other Mindbench, some of the other disruptive models in services, which are putting together collaborations and managing collaborations of experienced people to provide equal or better than big firms' services. I think we're going to see more of that.
Yeah.
And I think, so I think there's not the death of the professional services model or the professional partnership, but I can certainly see the change being accelerated.
Yeah. Well, I'm detecting a cautiously optimistic attitude, but certainly there is change ahead and there's a lot of hard work to be done. I'm just going to ask you for your final words of advice for the accounting leaders listening. Chris Rawdon, can I come to you first? Leave us with a little bit of wisdom and inspiration for the leaders listening and watching to cope with what's coming up.
Thanks. Well, I think broaden the service lines. I think, you know, look to see what opportunities you can have to bring lawyers, bring specialist consultancy or services into your offering, digital services, really show that you are a broad offering and that you are, you know, everything under one roof for the 21st century. In the same way, you know, people used to talk about that before, but, you know, we've got completely different demographic mix now. And I think it's also very important for leaders to invest in their people, particularly millennials, the generation after, you know, have a real L&D program. If you can't run it in-house, hire a professional L&D organization and really invest in this, because that's going to be one of the things that makes people want to stay. For the reasons like William said, you know, otherwise left to themselves, younger people will not want to do the traditional partnership journey and work towards that. But if they can see other opportunities in specialist areas where they have real talent, like in social media, selling, driving traffic to websites, driving marketing, all those kind of areas, I wouldn't mind betting that a lot of leaders don't really know the talent they've got within some of their younger people. And that could actually be the solution to many of their issues, to become a broader specialist.
Very good. Yeah, broaden your services, invest in your talent. Anthony, you always have energy and inspiration about you. What would you say to the leaders watching? Oh, you're muted at the moment.
Well, my point is not be afraid of change, but embrace this and be prepared to change. And then give opportunities to your young staff. Probably they are more able to understand the needs of the new generation and the needs coming in society that yourself. And at the end, nobody today is able to understand and to know everything. So collaboration is essential. And collaboration is very important to return young talent people. Only if you make them that the work is challenging, they would stay with you. It's not only money, especially is giving them opportunities to show how they can develop their own skills, and then this would be in the benefits of the practice.
Yeah, that's very good. Thank you, Anthony. And William, final words from you, distilling your years of wisdom in the professional services world. What advice would you give to the accounting leaders watching?
Stay close to the clients. Don't, under any circumstances, try and sell. Just try and be helpful.
Very succinctly put. Thank you very much. A last word from you, Chris Robinson of Lineal. You've heard the thoughts of everyone else. What would you say to the accounting leaders?
Well, I would absolutely endorse everything that has just been said, and I think really this is the moment to take stock, to have a 360-degree review of your firm, to develop a short to medium term business plan, but really around continuing and accelerating the journey towards a truly digital practice. You know, access from any device at any time, moving to the cloud, looking for the technology solutions in robotics and so on. I think, you know, this is the moment now that it really has to happen, because if you don't do it now, you'll miss the boat.
Yeah, that's very good.
There's opportunity there. Huge.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. And the appetite for changes now. We've shown that we can change very quickly in the accounting profession over the last few months. We've demonstrated agility, but now we need to push it further if we're going to pull out of this. We have that resilience. But if we're not going to change now, when are we going to change in professional services? So, gentlemen, I want to thank you so much for your energy, your enthusiasm, your inspiration, your insights today. It's been a wonderful panel. I've really enjoyed it. And we're going to close the recording now. I'll keep the Zoom room open just a little bit if you want to chat a bit more. I understand we've had 55 minutes. You may have another call in 3 or 4 minutes, because that's the way the world is. But it's been terrific to have you as our guest today. And thanks so much for taking part.
Thank you very much.